She walked into the most dangerous building in the city, carrying a tin of homemade cookies and absolutely no idea that the man sitting behind those steel doors had ordered 3 people killed before breakfast. Everyone on that floor knew what Dante Moretti was. A ghost with a body count. A name that made senators clear their calendars and police commissioners check their phones. Nobody warned Zayla Brooks. Nobody thought she'd last the week. They were wrong about a lot of things. If this story already has you hooked, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications, because what happens next in this office is going to shake you. Drop your city and country in the comments below. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Like this video, stay with me until the very end. Trust me, you do not want to miss what's coming. The elevator doors opened at 6:47 in the morning, and Zayla Brooks stepped onto the 43rd floor of Moretti Global, carrying a ceramic dish covered in foil, a canvas tote bag that was one bad zipper away from complete structural failure, and the quiet, determined smile of someone who had already decided today was going to be a good day, no matter what the world threw at her. The 43rd floor did not smile back. It never did. The space was all black marble and cold light, the kind of office designed specifically to make human beings feel small. Every surface gleamed. Every angle was deliberate. The air itself seemed to carry a warning, something low and electrical, like the moment before lightning splits a tree clean down the middle. The security desk sat directly across from the elevator bank, manned by a man named Gerald, who weighed somewhere north of 250, had hands like canned hams, and had not smiled in what colleagues estimated was approximately 4 years. Zayla smiled at him first. "Morning, Gerald." She shifted the ceramic dish under her arm and pulled out her badge. "I made the peach cobbler this time, with the brown sugar crust you liked." Gerald looked at the dish, then at her, then back at the dish. "You're the new PA," he said. It wasn't a question, it was closer to a diagnosis. Zayla Brooks. Started Monday. She pressed the badge against the reader and it beeped green. "I know I'm early. I wanted to get the coffee situation figured out before Mr. Moretti arrives. Nobody told me how he takes it, and I refuse to guess. Last job I guessed wrong and the man didn't speak to me for 11 days. Gerald's expression remained somewhere between a granite wall and a granite wall that had recently seen something mildly confusing. "Mr. Moretti doesn't drink coffee." Zayla stopped walking. "He doesn't—" "Water. Room temperature. Specific brand. It's in the briefing binder." She blinked. "There's a briefing binder?" Something moved across Gerald's face. It might have been sympathy. It might have been the early warning signal of a man watching a car roll slowly toward a cliff. "Third drawer, right side of the assistant's desk. Your predecessor organized it before she left." "Oh." Zayla nodded. "How long did she last?" Gerald looked at her for 3 full seconds. 11 days, he said. The cobbler suddenly felt very heavy. She found the desk without too much difficulty, which was already a better start than Monday, when she had walked into what she thought was the executive wing and ended up in a server room for 22 minutes before anyone noticed. The assistant station was positioned 12 feet from the double doors of Dante Moretti's private office, close enough to hear him if he raised his voice, far enough away that you had a half-second to compose yourself before he materialized in the doorway. Which, according to the briefing binder, she found it on the second try, first drawer, left side. Gerald had been testing her. He was known to do without warning and without sound, a quality that had caused no fewer than 4 previous assistants to spill things directly onto themselves. The binder was thorough, impressively almost intimidatingly thorough. Water. Voss. Room temperature, no ice, ever. Phone calls. Screened in the following priority order, 6 categories listed. Meetings. Never scheduled before 9, never scheduled past 5, never back-to-back without a 15-minute buffer. Dietary notes. Security protocols. A full page on how to interact with a man named Victor, who served as head of personal security and communicated almost exclusively through meaningful silence and the slow repositioning of his body between you and whatever you were trying to reach. There was no page on how to survive working for a man who had allegedly restructured the Eastern Seaboard's organized crime operations from the 43rd floor of a building with a coffee shop in the lobby and a zero-tolerance harassment policy in the employee handbook. That information, apparently, you were expected to acquire on your own. Zayla set the cobbler on the corner of her desk, found the electric kettle. The binder noted that she was permitted to make her own tea, just not near the server rack, and began reading through the morning schedule with the kind of focused attention she usually reserved for following complicated recipes in real time. She had been at it for about 20 minutes when the elevator opened again. She didn't look up right away. That was the thing about Zayla. She was thorough before she was reactive, which was either her greatest professional asset or the quality most likely to get her fired, depending on the day. She finished the sentence she was reading, made a small note in the margin of her notebook, and then raised her head. The man standing in the lobby was not what she had expected. She didn't know exactly what she had expected. The binder contained no photographs, and she had, somewhat deliberately, avoided searching his name online after her second interview, deciding it would be better to approach this job without the particular flavor of anxiety that came from reading the kind of profile pieces people wrote about Dante Moretti. She'd heard enough in the break room, cold, precise, didn't repeat himself, had fired a senior vice president over a 30-second voicemail, built something that looked like a corporation and functioned like a fist. The man walking across the marble floor toward her was tall, dark-suited, moving with the unhurried certainty of someone who had never once in his adult life had to rush because he was late. Because he was never late. The world adjusted its schedule accordingly. His face was severe in the way that certain landscapes were severe. Not ugly, but indifferent to whether you found it beautiful. Dark eyes that moved across the floor in practiced sweeps, cataloging, dismissing, cataloging again. Tattoos visible above the shirt collar. Hands that looked like they had carried weight for a very long time. He stopped when he reached her desk. She stood up. Not because the binder said to, but because it felt right, the way it felt right to stand when something important entered a room. Mr. Moretti, good morning. I'm Zayla Brooks, your new personal assistant. I've reviewed the morning schedule. Your 9 o'clock with the Delacroix group confirmed last night. The legal team pushed their check-in to 11:30, which I approved based on your open window, and your car is confirmed for... You made something, he said. She stopped. Looked at the cobbler. Peach cobbler. Yes, The security desk mentioned your water preference, and I realize I should have read the binder more carefully before I made assumptions about your... I didn't ask what it was. The way he said it wasn't cruel. It wasn't warm either. It was the tone of a man who had been lied to so many times that he had permanently reorganized his relationship with statements of fact. He looked at the dish the way he might look at a chess piece someone had placed on the board outside the rules of the game. Curious, skeptical, not yet certain whether to be annoyed. I made it because I always cook when I'm nervous, Zayla said, which was not the professional answer, but it was the true one, and for some reason the true one came out first. And I was nervous? First proper week, new building, security that is very tall and did not seem excited to see the cobbler. I cook when I'm nervous. I apologize if that's... Don't apologize. She stopped again. He held her gaze for a moment and something moved behind his eyes. Not softness, nothing so simple. More like recognition, the kind that arrives when something you didn't expect turns out to have more substance than its surface suggested. 9 o'clock, he said. Have the conference room ready by 8:45. I want the Delacroix documents on the table before they arrive, not during. He moved toward his office. And whatever that is, leave a piece outside Victor's office. He hasn't eaten since yesterday. He pushed through the double doors, and they closed behind him without a sound. Zayla stood there for a moment, notebook in hand, processing. Then she cut a very generous piece of cobbler, put it on a paper plate, and went looking for Victor. The weeks that followed did not get simpler. They never did, in places like this. But they did get, in certain quiet and unexpected ways, more human. Zayla learned the rhythms of the 43rd floor, the way you learned the rhythms of anything that had been operating on its own logic for a long time. Carefully, by watching, by making small mistakes, and correcting them before they became large ones. She learned that the administrative team preferred to eat lunch in shifts because somebody had once tried a group lunch, and it had ended in a territorial dispute over a window table that had resulted in 2 department transfers. She learned that the IT coordinator named Marcus had a coffee order so specific it required 6 modifiers, and that he would walk it back to the kitchen and remake it himself if any one of them was wrong, silently, without complaint, every single time. She learned that the conference rooms on the north side of the building ran cold regardless of the thermostat setting, and that if you were organizing a meeting there, you needed to mention this to participants in advance, or spend the first 10 minutes watching grown professionals in expensive suits pretend they weren't shivering. She learned all of this not from the binder, but from the people the binder didn't mention. The janitors who worked the early shift and had the most accurate read on any organization she had ever encountered. The receptionist on 42 named Diane, who had been with the company for 19 years and knew where everybody was buried, metaphorically speaking, and who on Zayla's third day had quietly warned her that the woman in the corner office on the south side, Celeste Vaughn, was the kind of person who smiled more the longer she had been looking at you, and that you should be most careful when she was smiling the widest. Zayla had filed this information in the part of her brain reserved for things that were probably true and definitely unfortunate. She met Celeste on a Thursday. The senior coordinator was everything the warning had suggested, and nothing that Zayla hadn't encountered before in some form. Polished to a mirror finish, efficient in the way that things with very sharp edges were efficient, and possessed of the particular social fluency that came from years of practice in identifying which words would land where and how hard. She was 36, precise, and had apparently been considered, at various points, for a promotion that had since been quietly shelved without explanation, which was the kind of institutional wound that didn't close, it just scabbed over and waited. The first exchange was brief. Zayla was reorganizing the supply closet on the executive floor. Nobody had asked her to, she had simply noticed that the filing system made no logical sense, and that 3 people had independently asked her in 1 week where the printer paper was. And Celeste came around the corner and stopped. "What are you doing in here?" "Reorganizing." Zayla turned around, smiled. The previous system put the heavy paper stock on the top shelf, which meant anyone under about 5'9" was essentially gambling with their spine every time they needed it. "I moved it to the second shelf and put the lighter stuff up top. It's not a permanent—" "Nobody asked you to do that." "No, but I was here and it was disorganized, so—" "This isn't your floor to fix." Celeste looked at her with the careful, assessing attention of someone measuring a distance. "You're an assistant. You support the executive schedule. You don't redecorate." Zayla kept the smile, not because she felt like smiling, but because she had learned a long time ago that the moment you let someone see they've landed a hit, they aim for the same spot again. "Noted. The papers still moved, though. It's genuinely safer that way." Celeste looked at the shelves, then at Zayla. Then she left. That was the first exchange. The others escalated. By the end of the 3rd week, Zayla understood that Celeste was not merely protective of territory. She was conducting a specific, sustained campaign aimed at one target, and the target was Zayla. And the weapons of choice were the kind of remarks that could always, if questioned, be described as professional feedback. Too casual with the executives. Too familiar with the support staff. Spending work time on personal projects, by which she meant the birthday cards Zayla had started leaving on desks, which she organized on her own time with her own supplies. Taking too long in the kitchen. The kitchen comment was delivered in front of 4 people, and the phrasing was precise enough that everyone understood what it meant, even though the words, technically, referred only to time management. Zayla smiled, made a note to bring in the vanilla almond pound cake she'd been testing on Friday, said nothing she would regret. But at night, on the 40-minute bus ride home, she sat in the window seat and watched the city lights drag past the glass, and felt the ache of it settle somewhere behind her sternum, that particular exhaustion that came not from working hard, but from working hard while pretending that someone's hands weren't pressing steadily on your shoulders, trying to push you down to a size they found more comfortable. She never mentioned it to anyone. She never did. That was the other thing about Zayla that nobody saw in the smile, in the cobbler, in the way she handed Gerald a coffee sleeve with his name on it, and watched something in his enormous face rearrange itself into something that was not quite warmth, but was in the neighborhood. She carried things, not loudly, not in a way that invited discussion or consolation. She carried things the way people carried things when they had been told, often enough and early enough, that their weight wasn't something other people should have to bear. The bruises started before the job. Or More accurately, the bruises were never fully gone. She was careful about it. Long sleeves in the office, which wasn't unusual in the over-air-conditioned climate of any corporate floor. A scarf in colors bright enough to read as fashion rather than concealment. Makeup applied with the practiced efficiency of someone who had been doing this long enough that it no longer felt like effort. Just part of the morning routine, same as the kettle, same as the bus schedule. She had, in the past 3 weeks, knocked her wrist hard against a metal shelving unit in the supply closet on the same day Celeste made the kitchen comment, had slipped on the bottom step of her building's front entrance on a rainy Tuesday morning, catching herself on the railing at the cost of a long bruise along her forearm, had been helping her father, who was 71, proud, and absolutely convinced that his new secondhand armchair needed to be moved to a slightly different position in the living room, and had misjudged the angle and walked the corner of it directly into her hip, with the solid, unambiguous impact of a thing that was not going to feel better until it felt worse first. She was accident-prone in the way that some people were, not through carelessness but through a kind of spatial optimism, a persistent belief that there was more room than there actually was, more clearance, more margin. The world kept disagreeing with her. She kept recalibrating. That was the arrangement. She didn't think anyone noticed. She was wrong about that. On a gray morning in the 4th week, she remembered it as gray not because she had checked the weather, but because gray was how the whole morning felt. The particular gray of a day when your body is running at 60% and your resolve is making up the rest. She arrived 7 minutes late. Not significantly late. Not the kind of late that rearranged anything. But late for her, which meant late in a way that caught her off balance before she even reached the elevator. And she was already slightly breathless when the doors opened and she crossed the lobby with her bag and her notebook and the folder she'd been reviewing on the bus that contained the revised Delacroix contract addendum that she'd caught a discrepancy in last night, a discrepancy that she was fairly certain nobody else had noticed yet. She was focused on the folder. The folder was the reason she didn't see the edge of the reception counter clearly. The tote bag caught the corner and swung wide, and the folder went, and Zayla went after it, and the scarf came loose in the process. Just enough, just for a moment, as she crouched down to gather the papers from the floor. Just enough that it slipped sideways, and the morning light from the east-facing windows fell directly and completely on the left side of her neck and the upper part of her arm where the sleeve had ridden up. And there it was, vivid and unambiguous, the bruise she'd been managing for 9 days. She got the folder, fixed the scarf, stood up, and became aware, without looking up, without needing to, that the elevator bank behind her had gone very quiet. She turned around slowly. Dante Moretti was standing 10 feet away in the middle of the lobby with his briefcase in his hand and his eyes on the place where the scarf had been a moment ago. He wasn't moving. He wasn't speaking. He was doing the thing she'd seen him do in meetings when someone said something that required him to completely restructure his understanding of the situation. That absolute stillness, like a system performing a process intensive enough to require the temporary suspension of all non-essential functions. Around him, 3 members of his security team stood at angles that made it clear they had also seen what he had seen and were currently waiting to understand what it meant. The whole floor was watching. Zayla smiled. It was a good smile. She'd built it over years. "Good morning, Mr. Moretti. I have the Delacroix addendum. I found a discrepancy in Section 4 that I think legal needs to look at before the 11:30. I can have a summary on your desk in 20 minutes if—" "Come to my office," he said. His voice was quiet. Completely quiet. The kind of quiet that wasn't the absence of force. It was force held at an angle. "I have the Delacroix summary needs. Victor." He didn't look away from her. "Hold the morning." Victor, who was standing to his left and had not moved perceptibly, said simply, "Yes." Dante turned toward the double doors. Zayla stood in the lobby with her folder and her fixed scarf, and the smile still technically in place, and understood, with a clarity that arrived like cold water, that the conversation she had been successfully avoiding for 4 weeks was about to happen whether she was ready for it or not. She followed him through the double doors. They closed behind her. The office smelled like cedar and something colder underneath it, something mineral and clean that had no business being in a room where human beings made decisions that altered other people's lives. Zayla noticed this the way she noticed everything, sideways, while her attention was pointed somewhere else. because the direct things in this room were too large to look at straight on. The desk that ran the length of a small apartment. The windows that dropped 43 floors to a street that looked, from up here, like something drawn rather than real. The man standing with his back to her, his jacket still on, briefcase set down with the precise placement of a person who had specific locations for everything in his life and had long since stopped tolerating deviations. She stood near the door, not against it. She wasn't going to be obvious about that, but near it. Dante turned around. He didn't sit. That was the first thing she registered. He stood on the other side of the desk and looked at her with the kind of attention that had nothing performative in it. No theater, no warmth deployed as strategy. Just looking, like he was solving something and she was the variable he hadn't accounted for. "Sit down," he said. "I'm fine standing, thank you." That wasn't a suggestion. She sat down. The chair was leather, expensive, the kind of chair that cost more than her monthly rent, and felt like it knew that. She put the folder on her knees and held it there with both hands and kept her back straight, because if she let herself settle into the chair, she would feel small, and she could not afford to feel small right now. Dante came around the side of the desk and leaned against the front of it, arms crossed, which put him close enough that she had to tilt her head slightly to hold eye contact. This was, she suspected, intentional. The man arranged space the way he arranged everything, to his advantage without appearing to try. "Tell me about the bruise," he said. "Simple. Flat. The way you stated a coordinate on a map." Zayla smiled. "I bruise easily. Always have. My mother used to say I fought with furniture, and the furniture won every... The one on your neck." The smile didn't waver. It was a very good smile. "I caught the edge of a shelf in the supply closet last week. You know how it is. The lighting in there is... And the one on your arm." She stopped smiling. Not dramatically, it just ran out, the way water ran out of a cracked container. She looked at the folder on her knees and then back at him and understood that the inventory he had just conducted had been thorough and quiet, and had probably begun not in the lobby this morning, but at some point she hadn't identified, some morning when she thought she was just being efficient and he was already watching. "I'm clumsy," she said. It was true. It was also, in this moment, not enough. "You're not clumsy. Mr. Moretti, with respect, you've known me for 4 weeks. You've reorganized the supply closet, caught 2 scheduling conflicts before they became problems, remembered the water preference of every senior executive on this floor, and gotten Gerald to smile 3 times. He said it without inflection, just items on a list. Clumsy people don't function at that level of detail. They're compensating for something else." The room held very still. Outside the windows, the city went about its business, indifferent. Zayla looked at the folder. "It's personal," she said finally. "And it's managed. I haven't let it affect my work. I'm not asking about your work." That landed wrong, or maybe right. She wasn't sure which was worse. She wasn't accustomed to someone drawing a line between those 2 things in her favor. Most people who noticed anything about her at all noticed it through the lens of whether it was inconvenient for them. She blinked, looked up. "Someone hurting you?" he asked. He asked it the way you asked whether it was raining. Direct, no decoration, but something underneath it that was very different from the surface. No. And this at least was completely true, which was why it came out without any of the scaffolding the other answers had required. "No. Nobody's hurting me. Nobody's hurting. I have a talent for occupying the same space as stationary objects and losing." A long silence. "Tell me," he said. Just that. And the thing about the way he said it, not tell me or I'll draw my own conclusions, not tell me because I'm your employer and I have a right to know, just tell me. The way one person said it to another person when the asking was the whole point, was that it dismantled something she'd been holding in a particular position for a very long time. She told him about the shelf. She told him about the bus steps, the wet ones, the rainy Tuesday, the way she'd caught the railing and felt the impact bloom along her forearm in real time. She told him about her father's armchair, about the corner, about the angle she'd misjudged. She told him the way she told stories, which was the way a person told a story when they had been practicing casualness for so long, it had become its own kind of honesty. Quick, slightly self-deprecating, the details selected to make the teller seem manageable rather than broken. She did not tell him about the nights, about how by 10 o'clock she was sometimes so tired she sat on the edge of the bathtub and just breathed for a while before she could make herself stand back up. She didn't tell him about the cost of the arnica gel, which she bought in bulk now, or about the particular mathematics of choosing which bruise needed the most coverage each morning. She didn't tell him any of that because some things were hers, and she was keeping them. When she finished, Dante was quiet for a moment, still leaning against the desk. Something had shifted in his face. Not softened, that wasn't the word, more like realigned, like a structure that had been built for one purpose, recognizing the existence of another one. "Your father," he said. "He lives alone?" "With me, on weekends. He has a place across town during the week. He's independent. He doesn't—" She stopped. "He doesn't like to need things. That runs in the family." She opened her mouth, closed it. That was accurate, and accurate things from unexpected directions always took a moment to absorb. "The 11:30, she said. "I should prep. Victor's handling the morning. Mr. Moretti, the discrepancy in the Delacroix addendum, Section 4. He looked at her steadily. "What did you find?" She blinked at the gear shift, then opened the folder, because this she could do. This was ground she knew. The liability clause references a subsidiary that was dissolved in March. If the contract executes as written, it creates a gap in coverage that the Delacroix attorneys will find inside of 10 minutes. I flagged it last night and drafted a corrected version. She held out a single page. It needs legal to sign off, but the language is here. He took it, read it, and something crossed his face that she had not seen in 4 weeks of watching him very carefully. Something adjacent to surprise, brief and quickly contained, the expression of a man who had expected competence and received something several grades above it. He set the page on the desk. "Send it to Marcus Chen in legal. Tell him I want confirmation before 11. "Yes, sir." "And eat something before the afternoon briefing. You've been here since 6:40 and you haven't eaten." She stared at him. "The cobbler," he said. "You brought it for other people. You never took a piece for yourself." He moved back around the desk and sat down, which was apparently the signal that the conversation was over. "That'll become a problem. I need you functional." She stood up, held the folder, moved toward the door. "Miss Brooks." She stopped. "Next time," he said, without looking up from the papers on his desk, "don't hide it." She didn't ask what he meant. She knew what he meant. She walked out of the office and pulled the door closed behind her and stood in the 12-foot stretch between his door and her desk and breathed slowly, once, twice, 3 times, until the thing behind her sternum settled back into something she recognized. Gerald was watching her from the security desk across the lobby. She squared her shoulders and went to make the call to legal. The Celeste problem did not improve in the days that followed. It compounded. It compounded the way these things always did. Not through dramatic confrontation, but through the slow accumulation of small pressures, each one deniable in isolation, each one selected with the kind of precision that required real intelligence and real malice working in tandem. A comment about response times during a team sync, delivered in the specific register of professional concern that made it impossible to object to without sounding defensive. An email CC'd to 3 senior managers questioning whether the birthday card system, Zayla's birthday cards, which she organized on her own time, which had by this point become something people on 2 other floors had started mentioning, was an appropriate use of company resources. A remark at the coffee station, audible to 4 people, about how certain positions required a certain kind of professional presence, the kind of thing that was established through experience and standards rather than cookies and charm. Zayla heard this one directly because she was standing 6 feet away getting hot water for her tea. She turned around. Celeste met her eyes with the wide, arranged smile that Diane on 42 had warned her about. 3 other employees stood in the kitchen, suddenly fascinated by their own beverages. "I think what you're trying to say," Zayla said, keeping her voice at a conversational register that was approximately impossible to misinterpret as aggression, "is that professional credibility looks a certain way, and that way is probably not me." Celeste's smile tightened at the edges, just slightly. "I'm saying standards exist for a reason." Zayla took her mug. "I processed 14 contracts last week. caught a six-figure liability gap in the Delacroix addendum, coordinated 3 cross-department scheduling conflicts, and maintained a zero-error record on the executive calendar for 4 weeks. But sure, let's talk about standards. She paused. The pound cake is in the break room, by the way. Vanilla almond. You should try it. She walked out. Behind her, the kitchen was very quiet. It was a small victory, and she knew with the particular intelligence of someone who had navigated this specific terrain before that small victories in this kind of war tended to increase the hostility rather than decrease it. She was right. 3 days later, Celeste filed a formal concern with HR. She called it a concern, not a complaint, which was a deliberate choice, about Zayla's scope of work, specifically the informal relationship-building activities that she characterized as exceeding the assistant role and potentially creating preferential dynamics with senior leadership. The HR coordinator, a man named Paul, who had the energy of someone who had seen everything and was tired of all of it, called Zayla in for an informal conversation. He read her the concern with the toneless delivery of a man reciting the terms and conditions nobody reads. "She's saying I bring baked goods," Zayla said when he finished. "She's saying the baked goods may represent an attempt to cultivate relationships outside your role. My role is to support the executive floor. Supporting the executive floor goes better when people aren't miserable. The baked goods help with that." Paul looked at her over his reading glasses. "Unofficially?" "Unofficially, yes." "Unofficially," Paul said, and closed the folder. "I know. This is going in the file as discussed and resolved. But watch your step, Ms. Brooks. Celeste Vaughn has been here for 6 years and she knows how to use the system." "I appreciate that," Zayla said. "Thank you for your time." She meant it. She always meant it. But on the bus home that evening, she sat in the window seat and watched the lights and felt the weight of it differently than she usually did. Not heavier exactly, more defined. More like something that had been abstract was resolving into a specific shape, and the shape was becoming clear enough that she could no longer pretend she didn't know what it was. Celeste was escalating because something had changed. The HR filing was not about baked goods or scope of work. It was about the fact that Dante Moretti had cleared his morning for a conversation with his personal assistant, which had never happened with any of her predecessors, and that the executive floor had noticed, and that some of them had drawn conclusions, and that Celeste, who had spent 6 years managing relationships on that floor with surgical precision, had recognized the shift in dynamics and responded the way people responded when they felt the ground moving under their carefully constructed position. She was scared. Zayla understood being scared. She just had to decide what to do with that information. Marcus Chen found her at her desk the following Tuesday morning, which was unusual because Marcus Chen communicated almost exclusively through email and the occasional precisely timed phone call, and was not known for appearing in person at locations other than his own office and the coffee machine. He sat down in the chair across from her desk and looked at her with the expression of someone who had decided to say something and was doing the final calculation on whether it was worth saying. "The Delacroix thing," he said. "Resolved," she said. Mr. Moretti confirmed. "I know. He stopped, rearranged. "I've been in legal for 9 years, 3 different assistants before you. None of them caught that clause." Zayla looked up from her screen. The subsidiary dissolution was in a footnote on page 47, which nobody reads. "I read everything." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "Where did you work before this?" "Regional logistics firm. Before that, a family-owned manufacturing company. Before that, a nonprofit that ran on 12 people and optimism. No law background." "No law background." He nodded slowly, the way people nodded when something confirmed a theory they'd been running. "Celeste filed that HR thing." "I know. It's not going anywhere, but she's—" He paused again, choosing. "She's been angling for a restructure of the executive support functions for about a year, consolidating coordination under her office. Your position, the way it's currently structured, is in the way of that." Zayla looked at him steadily. "You're telling me this because you caught a 6-figure error in a contract I reviewed twice and missed," Marcus said, with the flat honesty of a man paying a debt. "And because Celeste is better at this building than you are right now, and you should know that." He stood up, straightened his jacket, and left. Zayla sat with that for approximately 4 seconds. Then she opened her laptop and started reading every contract currently in the Moretti Global pipeline, from the beginning, cover to cover, footnotes included. She was on the third one when her phone buzzed. Not the office line. Her personal cell, which was set to a specific vibration pattern she used only for her father's number. She picked it up. "Baba?" She kept her voice level. "I'm at work." I know. His voice was warm and rough in equal measure, the voice of a man who had lived enough life to sand all the sharp edges off but had retained the weight underneath. "I just wanted to tell you the chair is in the new spot. You were right about the light." She felt something ease slightly in her chest. "I'm glad." "You sound tired, Zayla girl." "I'm fine." "You always say that." "Because I always am." A pause. The particular pause of a parent doing the math on what their child isn't saying. "You eating?" "Yes." "The real kind? Not just coffee and whatever you bring in for other people?" She thought about Dante Moretti telling her to eat something. On the morning of the conversation, she still hadn't fully processed. She thought about how two people who had never met each other had, independently, made the same observation and what that meant about how visible the thing she was hiding had become. "Yes, Baba," she said. "The real kind." "Good. Come Sunday. I'll make the fish." "I'll come Sunday." She hung up and sat for a moment with the phone in her hand and the screen full of contract language and the sound of the 43rd floor moving around her. Phones, footsteps, the distant percussion of a life that operated at a volume she had not expected when she carried a tin of cobbler into this building 5 weeks ago. Then she put the phone down and went back to reading. The staff gathering happened on a Thursday afternoon in the 43rd floor's main conference room, the large one on the north side that ran cold, which Zyla had notified all attendees about in advance, which she now noticed had resulted in approximately half the room wearing an extra layer, a small logistical victory that nobody would ever attribute to her and that she found, for reasons she couldn't fully explain, deeply satisfying. It was a quarterly update meeting. Department heads, senior coordinators, the legal and communications teams, executive assistants from 3 floors. Dante was not scheduled to attend. These were operationally his, but not tactically his, run by the COO, a precise and humorless man named Reeves, who managed the quarterly updates with the energy of someone diffusing something. Zayla sat near the back, which was habit. She took notes. She always took notes. She was writing down the third action item of the communications department update when Celeste, who was presenting the coordination team's quarterly numbers, paused mid-slide and said, with the cadence of someone introducing a parenthetical that was actually the whole point, "I do want to flag that some of the informal activities that have developed on the executive floor this quarter represent a scope creep that we should address. Not everyone is here in a social capacity, and the culture of an office is shaped by the standards we hold to, not the exceptions we make for people whose function doesn't actually include Celeste, Reeves, from the head of the table. "I'm just noting. You're editorializing. Next slide." A pause. The room held its breath in the specific way rooms did when someone in authority had drawn a line and everyone was waiting to see whether the other party would respect it. Celeste smiled. The wide one. She clicked to the next slide. And then, without looking away from the presentation screen, in a voice pitched just below the register that Reeves was tracking, she said, "Some of us actually worked for our seats at this table." The room did not quite go silent. But it changed. The particular change of people deciding very quickly whether to look at Zayla or away from her, most of them choosing away, the way people did when they were embarrassed on behalf of someone and didn't want to compound the exposure. Zayla felt the heat move up her neck. She kept her pen on the paper. She did not look at Celeste. She wrote down the number on the slide as if the number mattered more than what had just happened, which it didn't, but the act of writing it down was something to do with her hands while her pulse made its case. Reeves was speaking again. Something about Q4 projections. The meeting continued. It was Diane from 42 who found her afterward in the hallway outside the conference room. Diane, who had been in this building for 19 years and had the particular quality of someone who had watched enough to know exactly where the ground was hard. "She's getting worse," Diane said. "I know." Zayla's voice was even. She was proud of that. You should say something. To HR. To Reeves. I said something to HR. It's in a file somewhere. To Dante, then. Zayla looked at her. I'm not going to his office to report on a colleague. Why not? Because the moment she did that, she became someone who needed protecting. And the moment she became someone who needed protecting, she stopped being the person she had decided to be when she walked into this building with a tin of cobbler and a smile, and the quiet, private conviction that she was going to earn her place here through work, not through proximity to power. She didn't say any of this to Diane. I'll handle it, she said instead. Diane looked at her for a long moment. You know, she said, there's a difference between carrying your own weight and refusing to put anything down. Zayla didn't answer. She went back to her desk and found, sitting in the exact center of it, a single sheet of paper with 3 words written in a handwriting she had learned in 4 weeks to recognize. Precise, minimal. The handwriting of someone who had never needed to make their penmanship legible to anyone who wasn't already paying close attention. The 3 words were, I heard, stay. She turned around. The double doors to Dante's office were closed. She sat down at her desk. She stayed. At 4:53 that afternoon, the double doors opened and Dante walked out of his office in his jacket and his silence and crossed the floor to her desk and stood there until she looked up. Walk with me, he said. She stood up. They walked to the window at the end of the executive corridor, floor-to-ceiling glass, the whole city 43 floors below, the late afternoon light going amber and horizontal across everything, the kind of light that made the city look like something it mostly wasn't. He stood beside her looking out, not at her, at the city. Celeste Vaughn, he said, Mickey, 6-year tenure, senior coordinator, filed an HR concern 2 weeks ago about your scope of work. He paused. Reeves mentioned the meeting. It was handled. It wasn't. His voice was quiet and final in the way that certain physical facts were quiet and final. I want to be clear about something. What happens on this floor reflects on this organization. Every person on this floor, every person, operates under my authority and my protection. That includes you. She looked at the city. I can handle Celeste. I know you can. He turned his head and looked at her directly, and the light caught his face at an angle that showed the lines in it, the years, the things that had required him to become what he was. That's not the point. She met his eyes. Something passed between them that was not a conversation but was more than silence. The particular recognition of 2 people who have both been carrying weight for a very long time and have, each in their own way, gotten so used to the carrying that they have forgotten what it might feel like to set it down. What's the point? She asked. He looked back at the window. Outside, 43 floors below, the city moved in its perpetual, indifferent way. Celeste filed a second complaint this afternoon, he said. Not with HR, with the Board Oversight Committee. She's alleging that recent structural changes to the executive assistant role represent an undisclosed conflict of interest. He paused. Specifically, she is alleging that I have a personal interest in your continued employment that supersedes professional judgment. The city moved. Zayla stood very still. She filed with the board, she said. Yes. Because of a birthday card system and some cobbler. Because of considerably more than that, Dante said, and the way he said it was careful and precise and left no room for misinterpretation. The late light stretched across the floor between them. Zayla looked at her hands, then at the city, then at the man standing beside her, who was, she understood for the first time completely, and without the softening effect of professional distance, not simply her employer, and had not been simply her employer for some time now, and that the thing Celeste had filed with the board was not a misreading of the situation. It was a perfect reading of the situation. And that meant the situation was no longer something either of them could manage quietly from their respective corners of this floor. The choice that had been forming for 5 weeks, the one she had been navigating around with logistics and contracts and cobbler and the practiced architecture of a smile, had just arrived at her feet with nowhere left to go. She looked at Dante Moretti in the amber light of a Thursday afternoon and understood that the next thing she said was going to be the last thing she said before everything changed, and that there was no version of the next thing she said that did not change everything, and that this This particular no exit, no retreat, no more hallway to walk down moment was what it felt like when something that had been moving toward you finally arrived. She said, "What do you need me to do?" Not "what should I do?" Not "what are my options?" "What do you need me to do?" Which was the question of someone who had just made a decision and was already past the part where decisions felt like decisions, and into the part where they just felt like weight redistributed into a different configuration. Dante looked at her for 3 full seconds. In that time, the light shifted another degree toward evening, and somewhere below them the city kept moving, and neither of them acknowledged any of it. "Nothing," he said. "Tonight. The board. The board meets in 10 days. Between now and then, you do your job exactly as you have been doing it. You change nothing." His voice had the quality of something that had been tempered, heated and shaped and cooled into a specific form that held regardless of pressure. Celeste made a calculated move. Calculated moves have responses. And the response is, "Mine to handle." He turned from the window. "Go home, Ms. Brooks. Eat something real. Come back tomorrow and do your job." She wanted to argue. The argument was already forming. Structured, reasonable, the kind she built quickly and well when the situation required it. But something in the way he said it, not dismissive, not a command exactly, more like careful, more like someone handling something they had decided mattered. The argument dissolved before she could deploy it. She went home. She didn't sleep. The thing about not sleeping was that it gave your mind the hours to do what it did without the interruption of conscious management. And what her mind did, given uninterrupted hours and the particular silence of a city at 3 in the morning filtering through her window, was assemble the pieces she had been deliberately not looking at directly and arrange them on the table where she could no longer pretend they weren't there. Celeste's complaint to the board, not HR, the board. Which meant she had documentation, which meant she had been building something deliberately over a period of time, collecting evidence of something that could be characterized to 14 board members in a language they would understand and act on, a personal interest, an undisclosed relationship. The assistant who arrived early and stayed late and had somehow, inside of 5 weeks, become the person the most powerful man on the floor cleared his calendar for. Zayla stared at the ceiling and thought about the morning Dante had postponed the entire executive schedule for a conversation in his private office, about the note on her desk, about the walk to the window, about the way he had said considerably more than that, with the care of someone placing an object down without breaking it. She thought about what Celeste had seen that she herself had been, somehow, too close to see clearly. Then she thought about the board, about 14 people with fiduciary responsibilities and liability concerns, and the institutional memory of an organization that had survived decades by being precise about power and its management, about what they would do when presented with a documented case that the head of the organization had developed what could be characterized as a personal attachment to a junior employee of 5 weeks. She thought about the 11 days. Every previous assistant, 11 days. She had lasted 5 weeks. She had thought that was a victory. At 4 in the morning, she got up and made tea and sat at her kitchen table and looked at the contract binder she'd brought home. She brought work home. She always brought work home. It was one of her more arguable qualities. And tried to read. Got 3 pages in. Read the same paragraph 4 times and gave up. She thought about her father asking if she was eating the real kind. She thought about Dante Moretti telling her she never had to carry it alone. She pressed her palms flat on the table and breathed and told herself that she had survived things before and she would survive this, and that the sun would come up in approximately 2 hours. And that helped, slightly, and then it didn't. And then it did again. And that was how she got through to morning. She was at her desk by 6:15. Gerald watched her badge in with an expression that had evolved over 5 weeks from the granite wall to something that included, in small measure, concern. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. She gave him the nod that meant, "I'm fine," which he received with the expression of a man who had heard "I'm fine" enough times to know exactly what it covered. She made her tea. She pulled up the morning schedule. She prepared Dante's water. Voss, room temperature, set on the credenza inside the door before he arrived, so that it was simply there rather than presented. And she sat down and opened her laptop and began working through the inbox with the focused, methodical attention of someone who had decided that the work was the thing she could control and was therefore going to control the hell out of it. She was deep in a vendor correspondence thread when Marcus Chen appeared again. 8:47. Earlier than his previous unscheduled appearance, which told her something. He sat down. He looked at her laptop screen briefly, and then at her face with the expression of a man who had decided, again, to say something that was going to cost him something. "The board complaint," he said. She looked up. "You know about it." "Reeves called me last night." He paused. "He wanted a legal read on the exposure." "And?" Marcus folded his hands on his knee and looked at her the way he had looked at her when he told her about Celeste's structural ambitions, the look of someone paying a debt they hadn't chosen to incur. Celeste submitted 42 pages to the Oversight Committee. Emails, calendar records, security badge logs, time-stamped observations from other staff. She documented every interaction between you and Dante Moretti that deviated from standard assistant executive protocol going back to your first week. 42 pages. Zayla heard that number and felt something cold move through her from the sternum outward. Not panic, she'd made peace with panic enough times to recognize when it arrived and tell it to sit down. Something else. The specific cold of understanding that someone had been building something in the dark, carefully, for a long time, right next to you, and you hadn't seen it. "The birthday cards," she said. "Among other things." Marcus's voice was careful. "The cobbler. The supply closet reorganization. The conversation on Thursday afternoon at the window. There's a security camera at that end of the corridor." She included a still. A photograph. Of the two of them standing at the window in that amber light. Zayla in her scarf, Dante with the city behind him, close enough to the glass that the light came in around them both, and whatever was on their faces in that moment, the recognition, the weight being redistributed, the thing that had no name yet but had been building for 5 weeks. Captured and printed and placed in a 42-page document submitted to 14 board members. "She's been planning this since before I started," Zayla said. It wasn't a question. "Since before you started," Marcus confirmed. The timeline assembled itself with the clarity of something that had always been true and had simply required the right angle to become visible. Celeste, angling for structural consolidation of the executive support functions. The assistant role, in her way. A new hire arrives. A hire she had not been consulted on. A hire that immediately, inexplicably, begins to build something on the executive floor that Celeste's 6 years of strategic relationship management had never managed to build. And then the thing she couldn't have planned for. The new hire didn't just survive. She mattered, and the most powerful man in the building noticed. So Celeste had done the smart thing. She had documented everything and waited for the moment when the documentation would do the most damage. She had waited for the line to be crossed. She had filed the moment it was clear the line had moved permanently. "What does Reeves want?" Zayla asked. Marcus looked at his hands briefly. "He wants a clean resolution before the board meeting. Define clean." A silence that answered the question before the words did. "He thinks the easiest path is for you to resign voluntarily. He'd offer a full severance, a strong reference, dated, no." Marcus stopped. "No," she said again, and her voice was level and quiet and meant every letter. "I have not done anything wrong. I have not violated any policy. I have done my job, Marcus. I caught the Delacroix clause. I reorganized a supply closet that was a liability risk. I remembered birthdays because people matter. And I talked to my employer at a window at 5 in the afternoon, which is something that happens in every office in every building in this city every single day." She stopped. Her jaw was tight. She made herself release it. "I'm not resigning." Marcus looked at her for a long moment. He had the expression of a man who was updating his assessment of something he had underestimated. "Okay," he said. He left. She sat with the residue of the conversation for exactly 90 seconds. Timed not consciously, but by the length of the breathing she allowed herself before she pulled her hands back to the keyboard and went back to work. The double doors opened at 9:04. Dante came out of his office already in his jacket, which meant he had come in through the private entrance rather than the main elevator. He had done this twice before, both times on days when something was already in motion that he had been managing before the standard workday began. He crossed to her desk and she looked up, and in his face she saw something she had not seen in 5 weeks of watching him carefully. Not anger, not the cold operational remove he wore for business, but something beneath both of those, something that moved, briefly, before he brought it back under management. "You're aware of the submission," he said. "Marcus told me this morning." "What did he tell you Reeves wants?" She met his eyes. "A clean resolution." Something moved in his jaw. "And you told him?" "That I'm not resigning." She held his gaze. "I told him that before he finished the sentence." The thing in his face moved again, and this time it didn't go away as quickly. He stood at her desk and looked at her with the full weight of an attention that had never been casual, not once in 5 weeks, but that was now something additional. Something that had nothing left between it and what it actually was. "The board meeting is in 10 days, he said. "I know." Celeste's documentation is extensive and was assembled with the specific intent of framing professional conduct as personal impropriety. He paused. "She's good at this. She's been doing it for 6 years. "I know that too." Zayla. Her name, not Ms. Brooks. It was the first time. He didn't seem to notice he'd said it, or he noticed and decided not to walk it back, which was its own answer. "The board has the authority to mandate personnel changes. If they determine there is a conflict of interest, then let them determine it," she said, "with accurate information. Not 42 pages assembled by someone who was planning this before I even showed up for my first day." A long moment. Something settled in him. She could see it, the way water settled when you stopped disturbing it. He looked at her with the expression of someone who had been carrying something and had just become aware that the weight was different than he had calculated. "I need to make some calls," he said. "Your 9:30 is in 15 minutes. "I know." He didn't move. "How are you doing?" The question landed in the middle of everything else and sat there, simple and direct. And she thought about what she had told herself at 4 a.m. and about her father's voice asking if she was eating the real kind, and about the cost of the arnica gel and the practiced architecture of the smile and the length of time she had been carrying the total weight of her life without putting any of it down. "I'm managing," she said. He looked at her. "That's not what I asked." She held his gaze for 3 seconds. "I know," she said. He went back into his office. The 9:30 came and went. The morning moved at its own pace, which was the pace of a building that operated on the logic of empire regardless of what was happening in the private corners of the 43rd floor. Zayla worked. She managed the inbox and coordinated the afternoon briefing materials and sent the revised Q4 summary to Reeves's office and helped an intern from the communications team navigate the printer on 43, which had opinions about paper stock, and found the girl a correct weight paper in the relocated lower shelf where it was now safely reachable, and felt a clean and specific satisfaction in that small logistical victory, even in the middle of everything else. At 12:40, Victor appeared at the side of her desk. Victor appearing at the side of her desk was an event. In 5 weeks, he had communicated with her through Gerald, through the morning schedule, and through the occasional meaningful silence. His physical presence at her desk without prior coordination meant something was happening that he had been instructed to address in person. "There's a situation," he said. The word situation in Victor's vocabulary had a different weight than the word situation in most people's vocabulary. "What kind?" she said. "The woman on 42, Diane." He paused. "She went to Celeste this morning, told her that you'd been informed of the board submission, that you were aware of its contents." Zayla felt the cold move through her again, same direction, same path. "Diane told Celeste." "Yes." She thought about Diane at the supply closet door 19 years ago. Diane telling her to watch for the wide smile. Diane in the hallway after the staff meeting, telling her there was a difference between carrying weight and refusing to put anything down. Diane, who had been in this building for 19 years, who had seen everything, who knew where everybody was buried, who had apparently at some point between warning Zayla and this morning made a calculation that Zayla hadn't seen coming. "Why?" she said. Not accusatory, just the word. Victor's silence was its own answer, but he added to it. Celeste has been managing Diane's performance review for 3 years. Diane is 6 months from the pension threshold. The arithmetic was brutal and simple. Celeste had leverage. Diane had a pension. Zayla had 5 weeks in the building and no institutional debt anyone owed her. The warmth she had built on this floor, the birthday cards, the cobbler, the corners of genuine connection she had accumulated with the quiet patience of someone who had always believed in the fundamental decency of most people most of the time, had just revealed its exposure. You couldn't build warmth without building vulnerability. The people who received it could use it. Some of them would. "Does Celeste know I'm not resigning?" Zayla asked. "As of 40 minutes ago," Victor said. "Yes." "What does she do with that information?" Victor looked at her with the expression of a man who had spent a decade in security and had a very clear answer to that question. "She accelerates," he said. He left. Zayla sat at her desk. The afternoon light had shifted to the flat white of midday. Around her, the floor operated at its normal frequency. The phones, the movement, the distant hydraulic exhale of the elevator doors. She pressed her hands flat on the desk surface, the same way she had pressed them on the kitchen table at 4 in the morning, and breathed. Diane. She would not have predicted Diane. That was the thing about being wrong about people. It didn't arrive like a dramatic revelation, with music and weather to match. It arrived like this, quietly, in the middle of a Tuesday, delivered by a man who communicated in silences, while the phone rang and the city moved, and the rest of the floor kept going because the rest of the floor did not know that Zayla Brooks had just discovered that the person who had given her the first real warning in this building had also been the leak. She opened her laptop, pulled up the Board Oversight Committee's procedural guidelines. She had found the document 2 nights ago and memorized the relevant sections because that was what she did. She read things, she prepared, she built understanding the way other people built walls. She read through the section on conflict of interest declarations, on the process for rebuttal submissions, on timelines. She was 3 pages in when the email came through. The sender was Reeves. The subject line was, "Meeting request, priority. Today, 3 p.m. She read the email. Then she read it again. Then she sat very still for a moment because the email was not a meeting request in any functional sense. The email was a notification, dressed as a request, that carried within it the information that the board had called an emergency session rather than waiting for the standard 10-day schedule, and that the emergency session had been requested by 3 board members in response to new documentation submitted by Celeste Vaughn in the past 2 hours, and that the meeting would occur at 3 o'clock this afternoon, and that Zayla's attendance was required. Not requested. Required. She checked the time. 12:58, 2 hours. She forwarded the email to Dante's internal address without a cover note and picked up her desk phone and called Victor and said, "Did you know about the emergency session?" A pause. "As of 5 minutes ago." "Is he aware?" "He will be." She hung up, took a breath, thought about what she knew and what she didn't, and what was inside the 2 hours and what was outside them. Then she did something she almost never did. She picked up her personal phone and called her father. He answered on the second ring. "Zayla, girl." "Baba?" Her voice held. She was proud of that. "I need you to tell me something. Anything." "Did I make a mistake taking this job?" She wasn't asking about strategy or planning or institutional politics. She was asking the older, simpler question, the one underneath all the professional language. Did I put myself somewhere I don't belong? Did I misread the room? Am I what they say I am? Her father was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice had the quality it had when he was saying something he had been holding for the right moment. "You walked in there," he said, "carrying cobbler for a man you were scared of. That's not a mistake, that's you, and there's nothing wrong with you." She pressed her eyes closed. "Baba, go handle your business," he said. "Come Sunday, I'll have the fish ready." She hung up. She sat straight. She opened her notebook to a clean page. At 1:15, Dante came out of his office and walked to her desk and stood there with his phone in his hand and his jacket on, and his face in the controlled severity she had learned to read with more accuracy than she had expected to in 5 weeks. "You saw Reeves's email," he said, 2 hours ago." The documentation Celeste submitted in the past 2 hours includes a statement from a staff member on 42. He paused. A sworn statement, Zayla, submitted to the board's independent oversight liaison. She looked at him. Diane. Something crossed his face. You knew. Victor told me 40 minutes ago that Diane had communicated my awareness of the board submission to Celeste. I assumed the next step would be something like this. She paused. What does the statement say? He looked at her steadily. It states that you made comments to her on multiple occasions suggesting that your relationship with me was personal in nature, that you described your position here as secure because of personal rather than professional standing, that you used the word protected. The air in the room did something it hadn't done before. Zayla heard those words and felt them land one at a time, like objects placed on a scale, each one adding weight to something that was already being measured. She had not said those things. She knew with the absolute clarity of a person accounting for their own words that she had not said those things, had not thought those things, had not described her position in those terms to anyone anywhere. She had told Diane she could handle Celeste. She had told Diane she would manage it. She had not. She would not. She fabricated it, Zayla said. Her voice was very quiet. I know. She took whatever I actually said to her and rebuilt it. I know. His voice was the same quality as hers, quiet, certain, the kind of certain that didn't need volume because it had already done all the calculation. The board will have that statement in front of them at 3 o'clock. Yes. And if I walk into that meeting without a rebuttal, you don't walk into that meeting without me, he said. She looked at him. Dante? His name. The first time. She didn't seem to notice she'd said it, or she noticed and decided not to walk it back. If you walk in there with me, you confirm everything Celeste is alleging. Every board member in that room will read your presence as confirmation. I know what they'll read it as. Then you understand what I'm saying? Yes. His eyes didn't move from hers. And I want to be very clear about something. He set his phone face down on her desk, which meant it was off the record, which meant what he was about to say was for the space between the two of them and nothing else. I understand what walking into that room with you means. I understand what it will look like. I understand what it confirms. A pause. I understood all of that before you walked out of my office on Thursday afternoon. I understood it when I wrote 3 words on a piece of paper and put it on your desk. The floor held them both. Outside the window, the city was doing its indifferent thing. The light was moving. Somewhere on a lower floor, a phone rang and went to voicemail. Zayla looked at the man standing across her desk, who had built an empire on the premise that power was the only reliable protection, who had spent years believing that compassion was a liability, and who was now standing in the flat midday light of a Tuesday, telling her with complete directness that he had already made his choice, and the choice was her, and that he was walking into a room full of people with the authority to dismantle his entire organizational structure specifically to make that clear. And she understood, with the finality of something that had been approaching for 5 weeks, and had now arrived completely and without any remaining distance between them, that the person she had been when she walked into this building, the person who smiled through bruises and carried everything alone and made cobbler for other people, and took up as little space as possible so nobody would have to worry, was standing at the edge of something she had never let herself stand at the edge of before. The question was not whether to cross it. The question was whether she was going to cross it as herself, or as the smaller version of herself she had been constructing out of long sleeves and practiced smiles, and the deeply held conviction that needing anything from anyone was a burden she had no right to place. She picked up her notebook. She looked at Dante Moretti. Then we have 1 hour and 43 minutes, she said, and I need everything Celeste submitted to that board, and I need Marcus Chen in the conference room in 20 minutes. And I need you to understand that when we walk into that room, we walk in because I have built a case that makes Diane's statement irrelevant, not because you are standing next to me. She held his gaze. I don't need a shield. I need the truth on the table. Something happened in his face. Something that was not the controlled severity, not the operational remove, Not any of the faces she had cataloged in 5 weeks of watching. Something older than all of those. Something that had been waiting, possibly for a very long time, for someone to say that exact sentence to him. "Marcus will be there in 15 minutes, he said. He went back into his office. She opened her laptop, pulled up the board procedural guidelines, and began to build the rebuttal that was going to have to be the most precise and complete thing she had ever constructed in 1 hour and 43 minutes, against 42 pages of documentation and a sworn statement from a woman she had trusted, while bruises she had not fully disclosed to anyone pressed quietly against the fabric of her sleeves. And the clock moved forward with the indifference of clocks everywhere. And somewhere in the building, Celeste Vaughn was sitting in her office, believing she had already won. She hadn't won yet. And Zayla Brooks, clumsy, optimistic, bruised in more ways than the ones covered by long sleeves, the woman who apologized to furniture and made cobbler for men she was afraid of, and had never once in her adult life asked anyone to carry anything for her, was about to show an entire board of directors exactly what 5 weeks of reading everything and preparing for everything and refusing to give up on anything actually looked like when it walked into a room and opened its mouth. The conference room on the 43rd floor's north end ran cold. Zayla had warned everyone in advance. Nobody had worn an extra layer today. Marcus Chen arrived in 14 minutes, not 15, which told her he had been moving before she called. He came in with his laptop under one arm and a legal pad in his hand, and the expression of a man who had already begun running scenarios and had not liked most of them. He sat down across from her without preamble and opened the laptop and turned it so she could see the screen. "She submitted in 3 tranches," he said. "First tranche, the original 42 pages, filed 48 hours ago. Second tranche, Diane's sworn statement filed this morning at 11:17. Third tranche." He paused, the kind of pause that meant what came next required a breath. "Filed 22 minutes ago. I got the notification while I was walking down here." Zayla looked at the screen. "What's in the third tranche?" "Security footage." Marcus held her gaze. "The lobby, the morning your scarf slipped." The lobby, the morning her scarf slipped. The bruises on her neck and arm visible in the east-facing light. Dante stopping mid-lobby. His stillness. The command to Victor to hold the morning. The two of them disappearing through the double doors into a private conversation that nobody on the floor had been able to hear, but everybody had been able to see. "She's framing the bruises," Zayla said. "She's framing his response to the bruises." Marcus's voice was careful with the distinction because the distinction mattered. "She's arguing that his decision to clear the morning schedule for a private conversation with a junior employee, triggered by visible physical evidence of, her language, distress, constitutes a personal emotional response that compromised executive judgment. She has 3 witnesses who will testify that the floor's operational tempo shifted measurably after that morning." "It did shift," Zayla said, "because I caught the Delacroix clause that same week, and—" "I know," Marcus cut in, not unkindly, "but the board will hear it in the order she presents it, and the order she's presenting it places the operational changes after the personal moment, causality by sequence." Zayla sat with that for a moment. The architecture of it was genuinely good. Take true things, the bruises, the cleared schedule, the operational shifts, and arrange them in a sequence that made the true things tell a story that wasn't true. You didn't need to lie if you were precise enough about the order. "What do we have?" she said. It wasn't a question exactly. It was the beginning of an inventory. Marcus turned the laptop back toward himself. The Delacroix clause, documented, time-stamped, independently verified by 3 members of the legal team. The supply closet reorganization. I have 3 written accounts from staff members who used the new system and noted improved accessibility. He paused. The birthday card records. You kept receipt. I kept receipts because I paid for them myself, and I wanted to confirm I wasn't accidentally using company supplies. She almost smiled. I was being careful about scope. That carefulness is now evidence, Marcus made a note. The performance records, 0 scheduling errors in 5 weeks, which is a record for this position. The Delacroix timeline specifically places your contribution before the schedule was cleared, which breaks Celeste's causality argument if I present it correctly. He paused. But Diane's statement, is fabricated. I believe you. He said it without decoration. But I need something to put in front of 14 board members that moves it from your word against hers. The room was cold. The north side temperature issue, the one she'd warned everyone about, the one nobody had prepared for today. She felt it in her fingers, and in the place on her forearm where the bruise still lived under her sleeve. She pressed her palm flat on the table, focused. The specific language Diane attributed to me, she said. The word protected. Tell me exactly what the statement says. Marcus scrolled, read it. That on 2 separate occasions in the hallway, outside the 42nd floor kitchen, you stated, in substance, that your position was secure because you were personally protected by Dante Moretti, and that professional performance was secondary to that protection. Zayla nodded slowly. 2 occasions. In the hallway outside the 42nd floor kitchen, she looked at Marcus. Marcus, the hallway outside the 42nd floor kitchen. Where is the nearest security camera to that location? Marcus stopped scrolling. Directly above the kitchen door, she said. I know because I bumped into the mounting bracket with my elbow in week 2 and apologized to it, and then felt embarrassed and looked up to make sure nobody saw me. The camera has a coverage arc that includes the hallway to approximately 15 feet in either direction of the door. She paused. If Diane is claiming specific conversations in that specific location, either the camera captured them or it didn't. Marcus was already typing. His phone was at his ear before she finished the sentence, calling down to building security with the flat, urgent shorthand of a lawyer who has just identified the pivot point of an argument and is moving toward it at speed. She sat in the cold room and waited and felt her heart doing something purposeful in her chest. Not the anxious percussion of fear, but the steadier rhythm of someone whose mind had found the thread and was pulling. Victor appeared in the doorway at 1:43. He looked at Zayla and then at Marcus and assessed the situation in the way he assessed all situations, with the total economy of a person who did not spend attention on anything non-essential. He wants an update, Victor said. Tell him we have a lead on the camera footage from 42. She didn't look up from her notes. Tell him Marcus is on it and I need 20 more minutes. Victor's gaze moved to Marcus, who was still on the phone, typing with one hand, then back to Zayla. He left without another word. The 20 minutes were 23. At the end of them, Marcus set his phone down on the table and looked at her with the expression of a man who has just pulled a card from a deck and found exactly the card he needed. 11 weeks of footage, he said. The camera on 42 has a 90-day retention cycle. I have building security, pulling everything covering the hallway outside the kitchen for the period Diane's statement covers. He paused. Zayla, there are 11 instances of you and Diane in that hallway across the past 5 weeks, all captured. And the audio is partial. The system captures visual and ambient sound, not clear conversation audio. But the visual record will establish whether the interactions match the duration, the body language, and the physical positioning that you would expect from the kind of serious, private conversation Diane is describing. He held her gaze. If she's fabricating the content, the visual evidence is going to show 2 people having a quick hallway exchange, not a sustained confidence being shared in whispered tones. Zayla thought about every conversation she had had with Diane in that hallway. The quick ones, the passing by ones, the one where Diane had warned her about Celeste, the one after the staff meeting. None of them long. None of them the kind of leaning in, voice-lowered exchange you would conduct if you were confiding something sensitive. Get the footage, she said. I need timestamps, and I need them before 2:30. Already requested as an emergency pull. Marcus closed his laptop. There's something else. He said it in the tone of something else being the thing he had been building toward. The third tranche, the lobby footage of the morning your scarf slipped. He looked at her carefully. Celeste is using it to support the personal interest argument, but the footage shows something she apparently didn't account for. Zayla waited. Victor, Marcus said, his positioning when Dante stopped, his response to the visual of the bruises. Victor has worked personal security for Dante Moretti for 8 years. His protocols are documented. The response protocol for a situation involving a staff member displaying signs of physical distress it's in the security manual, Zayla, page 31. I pulled it an hour ago. He let the pause do its work. Victor's response that morning was by the book. He held the morning because that is the security team's documented response when the principal requests time with a staff member following observation of potential welfare concern. It is not an anomalous personal response. It is standard procedure. She stared at him. She submitted footage that supports the protocol response as if it was evidence of personal behavior. She either didn't read the security manual or she assumed nobody would pull it in time. Marcus's voice had something in it she had not heard from him before, something adjacent to satisfaction. I pulled it. Zayla pressed her palms on the table, breathed, looked at the clock on the wall, 2:07, 53 minutes. We need 3 things in front of the board at 3 o'clock, she said. The camera pull from 42, the security protocol from page 31 of the manual, and the Delacroix timeline with Marcus's legal certification. Everything else is supporting. She stood up. I'm going to Dante's office. She was at the door when Marcus said, Zayla. She turned. You know that even with all of this, he chose the next words carefully. The board is going to look at both of you walk into that room, and they are going to see what they are going to see. The documentation helps. It may not be enough. She looked at him for a moment. I know, she said. Get me the footage. She knocked twice on the double doors and went in without waiting, because they had run out of time for the kind of deference that lived in waiting. Dante was at his desk. His jacket was on. His phone was face down. He was reading something, and he set it aside when she came in and looked at her with the full, unmediated attention that had always been the thing most difficult to be on the receiving end of, not because it was hostile, but because it was complete. There was nothing partial about the way this man looked at you. He either looked or he didn't, and when he did, all of him was present. She stood across the desk and told him what they had. The camera footage, the security protocol, the Delacroix timeline. She told him in the condensed, structured shorthand of someone who had been doing this for 5 weeks and had learned his communication preferences exactly. No preamble, no softening, conclusions first and evidence second. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then, the camera footage. It's not confirmed yet. Marcus has the request in. He'll have confirmation before 2:30. If it doesn't come through in time, then we present what we have and the footage is submitted as supplemental within 24 hours. She held his gaze. It's enough without it. It's stronger with it. He looked at her. You built this in 90 minutes. I read fast. Something moved in his face, the thing that had been moving there with increasing frequency over 5 weeks, the thing that had no name in the vocabulary of a man who had built his life around the premise that nothing soft survived. It moved, and this time he didn't bring it back under management. He let it stay. There's something I need to tell you, he said, before we walk in there. She waited. The board's oversight committee. 3 members requested the emergency session. He paused. One of them is Raymond Holt. He's been looking for a structural argument to challenge my operational autonomy for 2 years. Celeste's filing isn't just a workplace complaint to him. It's the opening he has been waiting for. Another pause, heavier. If this goes wrong today, if the board finds in favor of the submission, the challenge won't stop at your position. She understood what he was saying. It goes to yours. To the authority structure of this organization. His voice was even, but underneath it, for the first time, she heard the cost of the evenness. What it took to hold that tone when the thing underneath was a man who had built everything he had from the ground and was watching someone try to use a 5-week assistant as a lever to dismantle it. Holt has 3 votes locked. He needs 4 more for a formal review. If today's session goes in his favor, he gets momentum. He looked at her directly. I need you to understand what this room is today. It's not a disciplinary hearing, it's a power play. And you are in the middle of it not because of anything you did, but because you were the available pressure point. She felt that land, felt it settle into the part of her that had been assembling the picture since 4 in the morning, the part that now had all the pieces in the correct positions and was seeing the full shape of it for the first time. She had walked into this building with Cobbler. She was now standing at the center of a structural power challenge to one of the most influential criminal enterprises in the country, with 42 pages of documentation against her and a fabricated sworn statement and a board member who had been waiting 2 years for exactly this kind of opening. She thought about 11 days. Every previous assistant, 11 days. She was in week 5. Then we make sure it doesn't go in his favor, she said. Dante stood up from the desk. He came around it and stood in front of her, not close in the way of proximity being used as anything other than what it was, which was two people having a real conversation in a room with no room left for anything but real. He looked at her, and she looked at him, and neither of them performed anything. "Are you sure?" he asked. "About walking in there?" "I was sure when I told Marcus I wasn't resigning." She paused. "I was sure before that." He held her gaze for a moment longer. Then he nodded, once, with the finality of someone who has made a decision and is done revisiting it. 2:30, he said. "My office." "We go in together." She went back to her desk. She worked. She made 3 calls, sent 2 emails, confirmed the afternoon briefing would be handled by the deputy coordinator in her absence, and ate half a sandwich she found in the break room refrigerator with her name on it in Marcus's handwriting, which she only noticed was his handwriting after she had already eaten 4 bites, and which told her Marcus Chen had been thinking about the moment she told him the real kind since that morning, and had acted on it quietly and without announcement, which was, she swallowed the bite she was chewing, which was the kind of thing that happened when you built something real in a place. At 2:26, her phone buzzed. Marcus. She picked up. 11 interactions on camera, he said, and his voice had the compressed energy of someone delivering something important fast. The longest is 47 seconds, most under 30. Body language analysis is available, but we don't need it. The visual record alone establishes that none of these interactions have the duration or character of the sustained private confidences Diane's statement describes. I have stills and time-stamped video clips ready to present. He paused. And the security protocol is certified. I have Victor's signature confirming the morning response was standard procedure. She closed her eyes for exactly 1 second. Opened them. Send everything to my tablet, she said. I'm walking in at 2:30. She stood up from her desk, smoothed her jacket, looked at the double doors. Gerald was watching her from the security desk. He had been watching her since she came back from the break room. She looked at him, and he did the thing he had done 3 times in 5 weeks, the thing that was not quite a smile but was in the neighborhood of one, and it meant more right now than she would ever tell him. She knocked on the double doors at 2:29 and went in. Dante was standing, jacket on, phone in hand, face in the controlled severity that she had learned was not coldness but precision, the face of a man allocating every available resource to the thing in front of him. He looked at her. She looked at him. Between them, the room held 5 weeks of cobbler and contracts, and bruises, and window conversations, and notes that said 3 words, and the particular weight of 2 people who had each, in their own way, been carrying everything alone for long enough that the arrival of someone else had changed the load without either of them asking for it to. "Ready?" he said. Yes. They walked out of the office together. The 43rd floor watched. Every person in their line of sight, Gerald, the receptionist at the central desk, the 2 junior coordinators on the east side, the communications analyst who had been pretending to read the same email for 10 minutes. Every one of them tracked the 2 figures crossing the lobby side by side, and every one of them registered the thing that Celeste's 42 pages had been built around, the thing that was neither deniable nor particularly complicated, which was that the most feared man on this floor was walking into a boardroom next to his assistant, and the word next to did not mean what it usually meant. Victor fell into position 2 steps behind them without being summoned. They reached the elevator bank. Dante pressed the button. They waited. The elevator arrived with the soft exhale of doors parting. They stepped in. The doors closed. In the elevator, going up to the board floor, Zayla stared at the panel of floor numbers and felt her pulse doing the purposeful thing, the rhythm of someone who has decided something is worth fighting for and has stopped spending energy on the question of whether they deserve to fight for it. Her hands were steady. Her breathing was controlled. The bruise on her arm pressed quietly against her sleeve. "The cobbler," Dante said. Without preamble, without looking away from the doors, she turned her head slightly. "What about it?" "The morning you brought it in." He paused. "You were terrified." "I was nervous. You were terrified," he said, and his voice was quiet and without judgment and entirely certain. And you smiled anyway. And you told Gerald you made it because you cook when you're nervous. He paused again. That was the first true thing anyone in that office had said in my presence in approximately 4 years. The elevator moved upward. The numbers changed. I didn't know that's what it was, she said. I know. He looked at the doors. That's why it worked. The elevator stopped. The doors opened onto the board floor, all dark wood and hushed carpet, and the particular quality of light in rooms where large decisions were made with small visible emotion. At the end of the corridor, the main boardroom doors stood closed. Through the glass panels on either side, she could see the shapes of people already seated. 14 chairs around a table long enough to land a small aircraft on. At the far end, barely visible at this distance, a figure in a gray suit that carried itself with the posture of someone who had been waiting for this room for a very long time. Raymond Holt. Beside her, Dante took one breath that she registered only because she had learned in 5 weeks to read the precise economy of his body's signals. It was not hesitation. It was the breath of a man at the beginning of something. She shifted her tablet under her arm, felt the weight of the evidence inside it. The camera stills, the timestamps, the protocol page, the Delacroix timeline. All of it arrayed with the careful precision of someone who read everything and prepared for everything and had built something in this building, one true thing at a time. I talk first, she said. He looked at her. This is about my position and my conduct, she said. I present the rebuttal. You are here as the executive authority confirming the record, but the case is mine. She held his gaze. Let me make it. Something moved in his face, the thing that had no name. And then he said the thing that landed differently from every other thing he had said in 5 weeks, quietly and without performance, the way statements of simple fact landed when the fact was something the speaker had already completely accepted. It always was, he said. She turned toward the boardroom doors. Her hand found the handle. The room on the other side was quiet with the specific quiet of power assembled and waiting. 14 faces turning toward the opening doors, 14 sets of eyes conducting their assessments in the practiced simultaneity of people who did this for a living. Celeste in the far left chair with the wide smile already in place, Diane not present. Witnesses didn't sit at the table. Zayla noted that. Filed it. Raymond Holt at the far end with the patience of a man who had already decided the outcome and was waiting for the formality to confirm it. Zayla Brooks walked into the room. She set her tablet on the table. She looked at 14 faces without flinching and felt the bruise on her arm and the cold from the air conditioning and the 2 hours of work behind her and the 5 weeks behind that and the whole accumulated weight of every morning she had spent building something in a place that had not been built for someone like her. And she felt all of it and stood straight inside it. My name is Zayla Brooks, she said. Her voice was level and clear and did not ask anything of the room. I am the personal assistant to Dante Moretti, head of Moretti Global. I have been in this position for 5 weeks. I have been asked to appear before this committee to respond to allegations submitted by Celeste Vaughn, senior coordinator. I intend to do that. She paused. And when I'm done, this committee is going to have a decision to make. Not about me. She looked at Raymond Holt at the far end of the table. About what this organization considers evidence. Holt's expression did not change, but something behind his eyes sharpened, the sharpening of a man who had expected a formality and had received something else. Celeste's smile tightened at the edges. The same micro-movement Zayla had catalogued in 5 weeks of watching. Dante stood at the door. Victor stood behind him. The boardroom held its breath. Zayla opened her tablet, and the room, which had been arranged for a conclusion, suddenly became something else entirely. A room where the conclusion was no longer certain. She pulled up the first document on her tablet and turned it so the screen faced the room. The Delacroix Addendum, she said. Contract number M-2024-447, executed in the 4th week of my employment. Section 4 contained a liability gap created by a reference to a dissolved subsidiary. I identified this discrepancy at 11:14 p.m. on a Tuesday, working from home, reading the document in full. She advanced to the next screen. This is the time-stamped email I sent to Marcus Chen, head of legal, flagging the issue. This is his response, confirming the error. This is the corrected language I drafted, which was incorporated into the final executed contract 3 days later. She looked up from the tablet. The estimated liability exposure of the uncorrected clause was $600,000. The discovery and correction of that clause occurred 5 days before the morning schedule was cleared for a private meeting, which means it occurred before the personal interest that Celeste Vaughn is alleging had any opportunity to influence executive decision-making. She paused. Causality requires sequence. Ms. Vaughn has the sequence wrong. The room was quiet. The particular quiet of people recalibrating. Raymond Holt had not moved. His hands were flat on the table, and his face was the face of a man who was still running his own numbers and had not yet finished. But something in the set of his shoulders had shifted. The slight reorganization of a person who had expected a door to open and had found a wall. Celeste's smile was holding. She was disciplined. Zayla gave her that. The supply closet reorganization, Zayla continued, and her voice stayed at the same register. Not heated, not denersive. The voice of someone presenting a case who has done the work and knows it. 3 staff members submitted written accounts at Marcus Chen's request this morning, documenting that the reorganization of heavy stock from the top shelf to the second shelf prevented a recurring physical risk for any employee under 5 feet 9. These are not informal anecdotes. These are signed statements. She advanced. They are here. She walked them through it in the order she had built it, giving each piece exactly the space it needed and no more. The birthday cards, her personal receipts, her personal time, confirmed by the timestamps on purchase records that placed every acquisition outside business hours. The performance record, 0 scheduling errors. The full calendar log, 5 weeks unbroken. She did not rush. She did not apologize. She moved through the evidence with the focused efficiency of someone who had read everything and prepared for everything and was now placing what she knew on the table in the exact configuration that made it impossible to misread. When she reached Diane's sworn statement, she stopped for a moment. Not from hesitation. She had rehearsed this transition in her head 3 times on the walk from her desk, and she knew exactly where to place the pause for maximum effect, which was immediately before the pivot, so that the room felt the weight of what was being addressed before the addressing began. The sworn statement submitted by Diane Purcell, administrative coordinator on the 42nd floor, alleges that I made statements to her on 2 specific occasions in the hallway outside the 42nd floor kitchen, claiming that my position was personally protected by Dante Moretti and that professional performance was secondary to that protection. She looked at the table. Not at Celeste, at the 14 faces arranged around the long surface of power and decision. I did not say those things. I want to be direct about that before I show you why I know you're about to believe me. She advanced to the camera footage. Moretti Global's security system retains 90 days of footage. The camera positioned above the 42nd floor kitchen door has a coverage arc that includes the hallway in both directions to approximately 15 feet. Building security pulled 11 recorded interactions between me and Diane Purcell in that hallway over the past 5 weeks at Marcus Chen's request this morning. These are the timestamps. She listed them. 11 instances. The duration of each. The longest interaction is 47 seconds. 7 of the 11 are under 30 seconds. These are the visual stills. She showed them. 2 women in a hallway. Quick, passing. The body language of people exchanging information in motion, not standing close and speaking low in the way of someone being confided to, not the posture of a sustained and serious private exchange. This is what a conversation in which I am allegedly disclosing sensitive personal information about my relationship with the head of this organization looks like on camera. She let them look at it. It does not look like that. Silence. Then Raymond Holt spoke for the first time. His voice was measured and unhurried, the voice of a man who had conducted many of these meetings and knew exactly how to redirect one without appearing to do so. Ms. Brooks, the camera footage establishes duration. It does not establish content. You're right, she said immediately, because conceding the point she could afford to concede was how you protected the points you couldn't. It doesn't establish content. What it establishes is that the interactions Diane Purcell describes, sustained, private, emotionally significant exchanges in which I disclosed sensitive personal information, did not occur in the location she specifies, because the visual record of every interaction in that location is inconsistent with the physical characteristics of that kind of exchange. She held his gaze. If those conversations happened, they happened somewhere the camera doesn't cover. Ms. Purcell chose a specific location in her statement. That location has footage. The footage contradicts the statement's characterization. She paused. The committee can draw its own conclusions about why a specific location was chosen that turned out to have documentation. Holt looked at her for a long moment. 3 seconds. 4. The security protocol, he said. Page 31. She had been waiting for this. Already included. Third document in the supplemental package Marcus Chen distributed to committee members before this session began. She watched the committee members who didn't already have it open flip to it now. The protocol for executive security response to a staff welfare observation is documented, established, and consistent with Victor Sorel's actions on the morning in question. The decision to hold the morning schedule was not an anomalous personal response. It was procedure. She paused. Page 31, paragraph 2, subsection C. The sound of 14 people turning to page 31. Celeste moved. A small movement, almost imperceptible. The adjustment of someone who has just discovered that the ground they were standing on has a different composition than they calculated. She shifted in her chair. The wide smile was still there, but it had lost something underneath it, some internal scaffolding that had been holding it at that particular angle. Holt set the protocol document down. He looked at Dante for the first time since the session had begun. Dante had not moved from the door. He had not spoken. He had stood in the precise stillness of a man who had made a commitment to let someone else carry something and was keeping it, which was, Zayla understood, one of the most difficult things a man like this could do. He met Holt's gaze with the evenness of someone who had nothing to defend because nothing true had been attacked. "Mr. Moretti," Holt said, "you are here in a personal capacity regarding these allegations?" "I am here in my capacity as the head of this organization," Dante said, "to confirm the accuracy of Ms. Brooks's employment record and to make clear that the conduct documented in Celeste Vaughn's submission falls entirely within established professional parameters." He paused. One beat. "And to make equally clear that any personnel decision affecting Ms. Brooks' position in this organization will be made on the basis of her performance record, which is without deficiency, and not on the basis of a campaign of documentation assembled with the specific intent of exploiting a staff welfare situation for strategic advantage." The room received this. Holt folded his hands. "You understand that the committee's concern—" "I understand the committee's concern precisely," Dante said, "and I'll address it directly, since we are all adults in this room." He moved from the door for the first time, came to stand beside Zayla at the table, which was the thing she had said would confirm everything Celeste was alleging, and which he was doing anyway, with full awareness, because they had crossed the place where management was possible 3 days ago at a window in amber light, and they both knew it. "My regard for Ms. Brooks is not a conflict of interest. It is a consequence of 5 weeks of working alongside someone who does her job with more integrity, precision, and genuine care for this organization than anyone on the 43rd floor in the past 4 years. If that observation constitutes a personal interest, then I am guilty of it, and I will take the board's judgment on what that means." Another pause. "But I will not participate in the fiction that a woman who caught a $600,000 liability error should be asked to resign because someone with a structural agenda found her useful." The room held very still. Raymond Holt looked at the table, at his hands, at something that wasn't in the room. Zayla watched him and understood, in the specific silence that followed Dante's words, that Holt was doing the calculation she had been doing since 4 in the morning, the one where you add up the pieces and see what shape they make. He had come in here with 3 votes locked and a strategic opening and a plan that required this proceeding to go in a specific direction. The proceeding was no longer going in that direction, and the footage, the protocol, the Delacroix timeline, the performance record, these were not things you argued against in a room with 14 people who had fiduciary responsibilities. These were things that made a specific conclusion unavoidable if you were operating in good faith, and Raymond Holt, whatever he was, operated in front of witnesses. He looked up at Celeste. It was a brief look, the kind of look that passed between people who had been operating in coordination when one of them has just discovered that the coordination has become a liability. Celeste saw it. Zayla saw her see it. The wide smile finally, completely stopped working. "The committee will recess for 30 minutes, Holt said. The room stood. Chairs moved. The sound of 14 people redistributing their weight and their positions. Celeste stood quickly, smoothing her jacket with the precise movements of someone trying to reconstruct a presentation they had prepared for a room that no longer existed. Zayla closed her tablet. Her hands were steady. She was surprised by that, slightly, and then not surprised because the steadiness was not the absence of feeling, but the other thing. The thing on the other side of the fear, once you have walked through it completely and discovered that it did not kill you. Marcus appeared at her elbow. He looked at the tablet and then at her and said very quietly, "That was the best extemporaneous legal presentation I have ever witnessed from a non-lawyer." She almost laughed. "I read fast." "So you keep saying." He paused. Holt looked at Celeste. "I know. That's not a man who just lost a vote. That's a man deciding what to do about the person who gave him bad information." "I know that too." She looked at him. "Thank you for the sandwich." Marcus Chen, who communicated almost exclusively through email and precise timing and had not in 9 years of employment been known to make personal gestures of any kind, looked mildly embarrassed. "You hadn't eaten," he said, and turned back toward his seat. The recess was 26 minutes, not 30. When the committee reconvened, Holt conducted it with the brisk efficiency of a man who had made a decision and was implementing it without residue. The vote on the conflict of interest allegation was 11-3 in favor of dismissal. The record would note that Celeste Vaughn's submission had been reviewed, found to contain material inconsistencies with documented evidence, and was dismissed in full. The security footage from the 42nd floor would be retained as part of the formal record. Diane Purcell's sworn statement would be referred to the company's independent ethics review panel for assessment of its accuracy. Celeste sat through all of this with her face arranged into the expression of someone who had decided that composure was the last thing left to protect, and who was protecting it with everything she had. She did not look at Zayla. She did not look at Holt again. She looked at the middle distance with the focused blankness of a person processing something large and unpleasant in real time. When the session closed, she stood, gathered her materials, and walked out without speaking to anyone. Zayla watched her go. Felt something in her chest that was not triumph. She had never been built for triumph. It wasn't the shape her emotions took, but was something quieter and more specific. The feeling of a thing that had been pressing against her finally stepping back. Not gone. Not resolved into something clean and simple. Just back. Far enough that she could breathe at full capacity. In the elevator going back down to 43, with Marcus and Victor and the sound of the building moving around them, Dante stood beside her and neither of them spoke until the doors opened on their floor. Then he said, "Come to my office, when you're ready." She went to her desk first, sat down, put the tablet in the drawer, looked at the surface of her desk, the water glass, the notebook, the pen she'd been using since week 1 that was running low and that she hadn't replaced yet because she was finishing what she started, and breathed through it, the whole of it, 5 weeks of it, the cobbler and the bruises and the binder and the cold conference room and the 47-second camera clips and the amber light at the window and the 3 words on a piece of paper, breathed through all of it in the 12 feet between the double doors in her chair, which was the smallest distance in the world, and also, somehow, the distance across which everything had changed. Gerald caught her eye from the security desk. He gave her the look. She gave him the nod that meant something different than it had the first time she used it. It meant I'm fine, and this time it was true. She went into Dante's office. He was at the window. Not the desk, the window on the east side of his office, the one that looked out over the city at a different angle than the corridor window, a slightly lower view of the same skyline that had the quality of something seen from inside rather than above. He didn't turn when she came in. She came and stood beside him, and they both looked at the city for a moment without speaking. "Celeste," he said, "she'll be terminated by end of week." "I know. The ethics panel will review Diane's statement. Depending on their findings, there may be further action." "I know." She paused. Diane was scared. She had a pension, and she had 6 months, and Celeste had 6 years of leverage. That doesn't make it right, but it makes it human. He looked at her. "You're defending her." "No, I'm explaining her." She looked at the city. "There's a difference." A silence. The good kind. The kind that didn't need to be filled. "The board," she said. "Holt. He came in with a structural play." "He did." "He still has 3 votes." "He does." Dante's voice was level. "He lost the opening today. He'll find another one." He paused. "He always does. That's the nature of people who want things." "Are you worried?" He considered the question with the seriousness it deserved, which was the thing she had learned about him that contradicted everything the building had told her before she arrived. That he did not dismiss questions, even uncomfortable ones, even ones that touched something real. He sat with them. He answered them honestly, or he said he wasn't going to answer, and he never pretended the question hadn't been asked. "No," he said, "not the way I would have been 6 weeks ago." He looked at the city. 6 weeks ago, I managed Holt by staying 3 moves ahead of every possible opening he could find. I spent an enormous amount of energy on that. A pause. Today he came in with documentation and a structural argument and a strategic play he'd been building for 2 years, and I stood at the door of a conference room and let a 5-week assistant dismantle it piece by piece. He paused again, and what was in his voice was not quite wonder, but was something in that neighborhood. And it worked better than anything I've done in 2 years, because it was true. Because the truth was on the table, and it was enough. He turned his head and looked at her. "You did that." "You stayed at the door," she said. "That wasn't nothing. For you, that was considerable." He held her gaze. "It was the hardest thing I've done in this building in a long time," he said, "and the simplicity of it was the thing that made it land. The complete absence of any kind of performance in the saying of it. Watching you carry it, knowing I had the resources to make it easier, standing at the door anyway because you told me the case was yours." "It was." "Yes." He looked back at the city. "I know that now in a way I didn't know it before. The case was yours. The winning of it was yours. And I needed to learn what it looked like when someone won something on the strength of what they actually built, rather than on the strength of what was standing behind them." A pause. "It's been a while since I've seen that." She looked at him, at the lines in his face that the window light showed clearly, the years in them, the cost in them, the particular topography of a man who had made hard decisions for a very long time and carried the weight of each one without apparent strain because the alternative was falling, and falling was not something he had ever allowed himself. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Yes." "The first morning, when I told you I brought the cobbler because I cook when I'm nervous." She paused. "You told me not to apologize, and then you told Victor to eat. And then you went into your office." She looked at the city. "Why?" He was quiet for a moment. "Because you told me a true thing," he said. "In a building where people spend enormous energy on the management of what they reveal, you told me a true thing without calculating whether it was useful first. You didn't know if I was the kind of man who would use it against you. You said it anyway." He paused. "I hadn't encountered that in a professional context in approximately 6 years. I didn't know what to do with it immediately, so I went into my office and thought about it." She almost smiled. "You thought about the cobbler." "I thought about what kind of person tells a true thing before they know if it's safe to." He looked at her. "The kind who does it because it's who they are. Not because they've calculated the risk and decided to proceed." He paused. "You didn't calculate, you just were." The city moved below them. The light was shifting toward late afternoon, the same amber that had come through the corridor window 3 days ago when the choice arrived, the same light that was now doing what light did at this hour over this city, turning the edges of things warmer than they actually were and making the whole skyline look, briefly, like something that had come out right. "I have to tell you something," Zayla said. He waited. The bruises. The real accounting of them. She kept her eyes on the city. The shelf was real. The bus step was real. My father's armchair was real. Those are all true. She paused. "But I've been doing this a long time. The covering, the long sleeves, the scarves." She felt the words coming from somewhere she didn't usually open. "Not because someone is hurting me, but because I have spent so long being the person who is fine, who is managing, who has everything handled, that the bruises became part of the management. Evidence that needed to be concealed so nobody would worry, so nobody would adjust, so I wouldn't be a problem that needed solving." She paused. "I think I convinced myself the hiding was consideration for other people. But I think it was also fear. That if people saw that I was sometimes hurt, they would stop seeing the other things. The work, the care, the—" She stopped. "Who you are?" he said quietly. "Yes." Silence. "The morning in the lobby," he said, "when the scarf slipped." "Yes." "I wasn't looking at the bruise and seeing a problem that needed solving," he said. "I was looking at someone who had been carrying pain privately for long enough that it had become structural. Part of the architecture shacked." He paused. "I know what that looks like because I have done it my entire adult life." He looked at her directly. "What I felt that morning was not concern for an employee. It was recognition." She turned her head and met his eyes. The recognition moved between them, not as a declaration or a performance, but as the simple settling of something that had been in motion for 5 weeks and had now arrived at its resting place. "I'm not good at this," she said. It cost her to say it, which was how she knew it was true. "Letting things be carried for me. I don't have a good framework for it. I know how to give. I've been giving since I was old enough to understand that my giving made things easier for people around me. I don't know the reverse." She looked at her hands. "I'm going to be bad at it." "I know," he said. "I might apologize to furniture in front of you." "You've been doing that for 5 weeks." Something moved in his face, and this time it completed its movement without being brought back. It arrived fully in his expression, changed the whole surface of it, and was, unmistakably and without any of the armor that usually managed it, warmth, real and specific and directed entirely at her. "I don't mind the furniture," she laughed. It came out smaller than she expected and more genuine than she intended, and it surprised her, the way genuine things surprised her when they arrived before she could prepare for them. She heard it in the room, and it sounded right in a way that very few things in this building had ever sounded right, and she saw him receive it, the laugh, the small, unrehearsed sound of it, and saw what it did to the warmth in his face, the way it deepened it, settled it further in. "My father is making fish on Sunday," she said. He looked at her. "He makes it every Sunday when I come," she said. "He puts too much pepper in it and acts like he doesn't know he's put too much pepper in it, and then he asks me 3 times if it's good, and I tell him it's perfect, and that's the arrangement." She paused. "I'd like you to come." The city moved. The light held its amber for another moment before beginning the slow progression toward evening. Dante Moretti, who had built an empire on the premise that trust was a liability and warmth was a structural weakness, and that the only things worth depending on were power and precision and the cold mathematics of survival, stood at a window in the building that was both his kingdom and his cage, and looked at the woman beside him who had walked into it carrying cobbler, and had proceeded over 5 weeks to take apart every argument he had ever made to himself about the kind of man he was permitted to be. "What time?" he said. She felt something ease in her chest. The last thing. The thing she hadn't known was still held tight until it released. "Noon," she said. "He'll want to feed you before you're hungry. That's his way of making people feel welcome before they know they're welcome." "That runs in the family," Dante said, and she heard the echo of it. The same words he had said in his office in week 1, about carrying without asking, the thing that runs in the family. And it meant something different now with 5 weeks between then and here, something larger, something that included both the inheritance and the cost of it, and the beginning of a different way of carrying the same essential nature. The afternoon kept moving. They stood at the window long enough for the light to complete its shift from amber to the cooler tone of early evening, the city settling into its second rhythm, the one that happened when the business day ended and the other life of the place began in the streets 43 floors below. At some point, Victor appeared in the doorway behind them, checked his principal with the quick professional scan of a man whose entire function was the safety of the person he served, registered the scene at the window. 2 people standing in the evening light without urgency, without performance, in the simple shared presence of people who have been through something difficult together and have arrived somewhere they did not plan for and have decided to stay, and withdrew without a sound. On the 43rd floor, the day was ending. Gerald locked the security desk at 6 and put on his jacket and paused at the executive assistant station on his way out, where he set a small paper cup of coffee down in the exact center of the desk blotter. Black. No additions. The way he had learned she took it when the day had been the kind of day that required more than tea. He didn't leave a note. He didn't need to. Marcus Chen sent a single email at 6:12 that contained no greeting and no signature, only 3 lines. The ethics panel had accepted Diane Purcell's statement for formal review. The board session notes had been officially entered into record with the dismissal finding, and the Delacroix contract had been executed with the corrected clause and was now fully enforceable. He CC'd Zayla and filed it and went home, which was the only celebration he was built for, and which was, in its own way, complete. Somewhere on the 42nd floor, Diane Purcell sat at her desk after everyone else had left, in the particular silence of a building emptying out, and looked at the screensaver moving across her monitor, and felt the specific weight of something that had felt in the moment of doing like survival, and felt, in the aftermath, like the thing you traded your survival for, which was the same size and shape as what you gave up except heavier and without the warmth. She would face the ethics panel in 2 weeks. She would tell them what she had actually said and what she had not said, and why she had signed the statement, and what Celeste had in her hand when she asked for it. She would be honest in the way that people were honest when they had run out of the energy required for the alternative. It would cost her something. She already knew what. She sat in the emptying building and breathed through it, and outside the city moved with its absolute indifference, and that was what it was. Celeste Vaughn cleared her desk on Friday, as Dante had said she would. She took the things that were hers and left the things that were the company's, and said nothing to anyone on the way out, except a brief professional farewell to the receptionist on 43, who was the only person near the elevator when she left. She did not look toward the executive assistant station. She walked to the elevator with her box and her composure and her 6 years of institutional knowledge and her 2.5 years of strategic planning, and she pressed the button and waited, and the elevator came and she got in and the doors closed and the 43rd floor went back to its business. That was how it ended for her. Not with drama, not with the kind of confrontation that stories made of, with an elevator and a box and a Tuesday afternoon and the complete unmarked conclusion of something that had been building for a long time toward a result nobody had won cleanly. Zayla did not watch her go. She was at her desk reviewing the following week's schedule, which was the job. And the job was what she had said she was there to do, and so she did it. On Sunday, Zayla's father put too much pepper in the fish. He brought it to the table with the careful pride of a man presenting something that was genuinely his best work, and asked no one's assessment because he already knew the answer, setting the plates down with the particular deliberateness of someone who had learned that the way you placed a thing in front of someone told them something about how much you meant the gesture. Dante Moretti ate it and said it was good and meant it. Zayla's father asked him twice more if it was good, and twice more Dante said yes. And the second time he said yes, he looked up from the plate and met the old man's eyes across the table, and something passed between them that didn't require language. The recognition of 2 people who had both spent a long time inside their own armor and understood, looking at each other, that the woman between them had managed, by some combination of nature and stubbornness and the specific courage of someone who showed up completely wherever she went, to get inside both of them without either of them seeing it coming. Zayla's father looked at his fish. She puts extra arnica in the cupboard above the sink, he said, to no one in particular, in the tone of someone stating a household fact. Has for 2 years. Case of it. You'd think she was training for something. He paused. She's not clumsy, you know. She just believes there's more room than there is. He looked up. Always has. Dante set his fork down. I know, he said. She doesn't ask for things, her father said. Never has. Drives me crazy. He picked his fork back up. You'll have to insist. That's the only way. I'm working on it, Dante said. Her father looked at him for a long moment with the assessing patience of a man who had spent 71 years learning the difference between people who said things and people who meant them. Then he nodded, once, in the way of someone who has completed a calculation and accepts the result. More fish, he said. Yes, said Dante. Across the table, Zayla watched this exchange and felt the thing in her chest that had been held in a particular position for longer than she could accurately remember begin, slowly and without fanfare, to release. Not all at once. Not in any dramatic way. The way things actually changed, gradually, in the small moments between the large ones, in the putting of too much pepper in the fish and the saying of yes anyway, in the insisting and the working on it, in the presence of people at a table who had chosen to show up. She reached over and took the serving spoon and gave herself more fish, which she didn't do, which she always left for her father or whoever else was there, which she was doing now because the habit of taking up less space than she actually occupied was one of the things she was putting down, slowly, one small deliberate action at a time. Her father saw her do it. He said nothing. But the thing in his face, the specific softening of a parent watching a child choose something good for themselves for the first time, was the kind of thing you could spend a long time trying to earn and then receive unexpectedly on a Sunday afternoon when you were just reaching for a spoon. Outside, the city continued its perpetual motion. 43 floors above it, the lights of Moretti Global's executive floor came on with the automatic timing of a building that kept its own schedule regardless of who was in it, illuminating the desk with the notebook and the tablet and the small paper cup Gerald would leave again next time, and the chair that cost more than her rent, and had long since stopped feeling like it knew that, because she had sat in it enough times now that it had become simply where she sat. The case had been made, the record had been set. The things that needed to be said had been said in a boardroom in front of 14 people by a woman who had not flinched, and the truth had been sufficient, which was not always how it went and was, on this occasion, how it went. What remained was not the dramatic ending of a story, but something more durable and less clean. The ordinary continuation of two people who had changed each other, eating fish with too much pepper on a Sunday, in the home of a man who asked 3 times if it was good, because that was how he showed the thing he didn't have words for. Zayla Brooks passed the serving dish to Dante Moretti. He took it. Outside, the afternoon moved toward evening, the light doing what light always did at this hour, making the edges of things warmer than they actually were, turning the ordinary into something that looked, from the right angle, like it had come out exactly right. It had not come out easily. It had not come out without cost. Diane would sit with her ethics panel. Holt would find another opening, someday, and it would need to be met. The 43rd floor would continue to be the 43rd floor, with all the weight that carried, and the world that operated inside Moretti Global's elegant exterior would continue to be what it was, complex, demanding, and not particularly forgiving of anything less than complete preparation. But the woman who had walked into that building 5 weeks ago with a ceramic dish and a failing tote bag and a smile she had built over years to carry things she refused to put down, she was still there. She was still bringing cobbler. She was still reading everything. She was still remembering birthdays and warning people about cold conference rooms and apologizing to furniture and doing it all without apology, without reduction, without making herself smaller to fit a space that had been designed before she arrived. She was still, entirely, and without revision, herself. And the empire that surrounded her was, quietly and without announcement, better for it. That was the whole of it. That was enough.